All right, well, thank you all for coming. I was thinking about this and so I've been at Sesame about 5 years, October 1st, so a little more than 5 years. And I'm not sure a year has gone by when I haven't introduced Alex giving a paper. So this is we may have missed one during the pandemic.
No, I think during that too, because during the pandemic is when we had, that's when we had the Mesa, the virtual Mesa panel.
Okay.
And you introduced me when I was giving my lecture on the polemics of Musalkati against Sunni Islam.
Yeah, so we'll call this the 5th annual Alex Shepard Center for the Study of the Middle East lecture. This will be the last Alex Shepard memorial lecture with Alex as a student. Inshallah, he will finish his PhD this spring. And the title of today's paper is Messianism, Babism, and the New Shiism, roughly.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Carl,
Alex Shepard,
for that introduction. And yes, thank you all very much for attending and coming out on this Monday afternoon when the weather outside seems to be clearing up and getting a little bit warmer. I'm glad you're all decided to spend it with me today. And also a very special thank you to Carl Pearson and Dr. Faisal Shribati and the Center for the Study of the Middle East for allowing me to present my research. And a very special thank you to my future co-panelists, Mr. Stephen Kitchell, and my future discussant, Dr. Mark Solinsky. And a very special thank you to the Association for the Study of the Middle East and Africa, where I will be presenting this similar research in about a week from now. So yes, my paper concerns the rise of the religion of Babism in the 19th century Iran. And it's contextualized in my broader research, my broader dissertation topic, which concerns the debates about the consolidation and the centralization of power within the history of Shiite theology. It concerns specifically, my dissertation looks at multiple instances throughout Shiite history of Shiite intellectuals, as well as other figures who have tried to really grapple the question is how should power and statecraft be administered and centralized. And this, so looking here at Babism and also its predecessor of Shiism, this looks at how these attempts here in the 19th century are an attempt to grapple this paradox of power. Now, what exactly is, just extend a little bit more to get this going, what exactly is this consolidation of power? What exactly is this fundamental question? And this question can be traced back to Usul al-Kafi, the main Shiite work of Hadith itself, which makes the case for the imamate, for especially the 12 imams within Shia Islam as the representative of gods on earth, for the imams described in Usul al-Kafi, as well as the writings of other prominent Shiite figures, such as Ibn Babuya and Mufid. I'll say that the imam is God's representative on earth. The imam was together with the Prophet Fatima and the Prophet Muhammad himself were created specifically from God's light at the very beginning of creation, and which is why in Usul al-Kafi, the main Shiite book of Hadith, most of the Hadiths go back to the imams themselves, and very few are traced directly back to the Prophet Muhammad for the words of an imam as much weight as the words of the Prophet himself. Now, in terms of looking at this as a consolidation of power, it's very clear that we have multiple hadiths where the imam attributed to the imams is collected by al-Kulaini, that these imams argue against other Shiite groups who had more decentralized notions of power, most notably the Zaydis, the dominant sect in modern-day Yemen. For Zaydis and their interpretation of the imamate, didn't believe in the necessity of having one imam or any imams. They said the imam was whoever fought for justice and had a blood relation to the Prophet Muhammad. And there's many dialogues within Usul al-Kafi between Zaidi Imams and the Imams of the 12th tradition, arguing about this proper ontological nature. Now, but in the aftermath of the occultation of the 12th Imam, there was such another internal debate within Shia. So we look at how 12 for Shiite Imami theology specifically grew out of this dispute, of this consolidation, about the consolidations of power. However, the 12th Imam, Muhammad al-Mahdi, is believed by Shiites to have gone in the state of occultation. He was rescued by God, and now in a spiritual plane, Shiite Muslims wait his return. But then this crisis of this about how to properly administer state affairs, how to consolidate power, continued on within the 12 Shiite community after the disappearance of 12th Imam. And we'll see, especially in centuries later, with the rise of the Safavid dynasty, there was an extensive debate amongst Shiite and clergy amongst how to properly relate to the Safavid and then later the Qajar monarchies. For essentially, one faction said, well, even the Safavid and Qajar Shahs, even though they proclaim themselves as Shiite, even though they openly say that we're at the feet of the 12 Imams, and one faction of Shiite clergy did say, well, yes, God raised up Shah Ismail in order to pave the way for the coming of the 12th Imam and convert the Iran to Shiism. Other factions, 12 or Shiite intellectuals and clergy rejected that, saying, well, no, we can't give our allegiance to any figure who's not the 12th Imam. And so we see here, just give you understanding of the history leading up to the 19th century of these internal debates which existed in Shiism surrounding the consolidations of power. Now, in the 19th century Iran, which at the time was ruled by the Qajar dynasty, the successors to the Safavids, there was many different intellectual schools which were flourishing at this time period because by this point, many Iranians had studied the Western philosophy, and then there was individuals who were promoting some reformist ideas, and there was the popularity of mysticism. There was a very strong, rich tradition in the history of 12 Shiism of emphasizing a more intimate connection with God, emphasize the soul's ascension to oneness with God and attaining a state of divine illumination. And there are also, again, there are debates, most prominently, a debate which arose in the latter part of the Safavid dynasty, and which was still continuing on during the rise of the 19th century, was the debates between Usuli and Akhbari Shiites. For Usuli Shiites, stress the importance of following a marja, following someone who, a Shiite scholar who had studied Islamic theology and jurisprudence, and as well as basic reasoning in order to come up with rulings. And there was another faction called the Akhbari school who said, well, no, we don't really need clergy, we don't really need marja, we should just stick to the Quran and the Hadiths themselves. Another is also in the 1900s, in the middle 1900s, it was approaching about the 1,000-year mark. It was believed the 12th Imam entered into a state of occultation, and even though there was no Hadith, and let alone any Quran verse, which specifically says 1,000 years after the 12th Imam entered into a state of occultation, we expect he'll return around this time. Now, one movement which arose in this time period was a Shiite intellectual and mystic named Sheikh Ahmed Asari, who grappled with many of these issues, and he produced a very complex, very unique mystical theology, which was rooted in very deeply rooted in Akhbari Shiism. Among Sheikh Ahmed Asai's ideas was his reinterpretation of the concept of Yom Kiyama, or Day of Judgment. For the Quran mentions the coming of Yom Ad-Din, the coming of Day of Judgment, and it's a very important part of Islamic eschatology. At the end times, God will raise everyone up and give everyone a final judgment. But Sheikh al-Mahasi promoted a new interpretation where he said these references to Yom Kiyama, the Day of Judgment, it doesn't refer really to the ending of the world as such. These Quranic references and Hadith references to the Day of Judgment or final judgment, it's really in reference to the coming of a new cycle, the coming of a new beginning in time and the start of a new era for human civilization. It doesn't literally mean the ending of the world as such. And another important aspect of Sheikh Asai's theology was a very strong emphasis on essentially a Manichaean and obviously heavily influenced by Zoroastrian form of dualism. He stressed heavily on the dichotomy between God and Satan, and using Zoroastrian terms like Ahimsa for the devil. And he spoke in detail about this perpetual conflict between the imams of light and goodness. And he even argued there was 12. I'm not sure if Al-Sheikh Ahmad Asai himself came up with this concept, but he argued for also the existence of 12 imams of darkness who served Satan, and they were trapped in this perpetual struggle. And from this notion, Sheikh Asai, he heavily criticized other Shiite theologians and mystics. He was highly critical of the 12er Shiite theologian Mullah Sadra, who famously argued in defense of Imam al-Arabi's concept of oneness of being, or one, everything being one existence. Although he was influenced by Mullah Sadra in other respects, where he talked about everything besides God being in a state of change, and arguing against the idea of any kind of eternal essences. And also he also emphasized, just as most essentially every mystic has, especially in Islamic tradition, this the journey of the souls through multiple levels of spiritual gnosis until they finally attain a state of divine unity. And however, he made it very clear, as other Shiite mystics have in the past, going back to even the dawn of the Shiite mysticism, almost a millennia before then, of the distinction between the saint and the imam. And he made it very clear that the mystic who attains the state of divine annihilation does so at the feet of the imam, or no one can rise to their level. And the 12 imams, together with Fatima and the Prophet Muhammad, they are the efficient cause of the universe. The universe would not have existed unless God had created the 14 infallibles first, specifically for their habitation. So as such, he was highly critical of other theological schools, which had been and other more reformist concepts, which began to circulate in Iran at this time period, who tried to downplay the spiritual significance of the imams, trying to say that, well, they're not really supernatural, they're just more enlightened human beings. There's really nothing of great importance in them. So now understanding so the popularization of Shaikhism and his particular interpretation of Shiism, and mysticism, it helped create a lot of expectations within Iran, which helped give rise to the religion of Babism. Namely, that with his emphasis, because in addition to his reinterpretation of concepts of the Day of Judgment, he also was a big proponent of this idea that I mentioned before about the imminent return of the 12th Imam. And so after the death of Sheikh al-Asai, there were some who succeeded him, and eventually a man named Ali Muhammad Shirazi, and who later became took the name Bab, became one of his most prominent students of his teachings, who then utilized that to advance his own claim to Messianism. Now, to contextualize Bab, in his religion of Babism and contextualizing the Shiism. The term Bab is Arabic and Persian word for gate, specifically in reference to the door to the gate of the 12th Imam. And this is a term directly from the concept of Shiism and its concept of the occultation. For its central to Shia Islam is that once the 12th Imam entered into a state of occultation, there were 4 Babs or gates or deputies who he communicated with, and this is known as what's called lesser occultation. And the 4th Bab died, which left the 12th Imam without any direct gate to the world, and which is why we are now in the state of greater occultation, 12th Imam existing hidden from humanity without any direct conduit. Now, the Bab's claims became more advanced as his career went on. In his very first book, he wrote at age 25, was a commentary on the Surah of the Quran, on the Surah of Yusuf. From this, he positioned himself firmly within the Shia Islamic tradition. He was a little ambiguous about the status, but he addressed himself as the Bab, or the gate to the hidden Imam. And in this commentary, he espouses many Orthodox Shia viewpoints, and he gave typical descriptions of the prophets and the Imams as spiritual successors, and drew a parallel. And he cites both Yusuf and examples of Imam Hussein as evidence for his own claim to being the Bab 12th Imam. But here he's still, very much rooted in the 12th Shia tradition. And Surah al-Yusuf was, in fact, written in Arabic. But later on, within his Persian Bayan, he makes, while still rooting himself, clearly within the Shiite tradition, he takes these ideas advanced by the Sheikhis and he develops them, even further, and he makes more of a complete break with Shiism. And instead of arguing he's just a Bab, he argues the fact he is the 12th Imam who has come to eclipse Shia Islam and create a new set of laws for the Messianic age. Specifically, he draws extensively on the early Shiite notion of the Day of Judgment as a more of the beginning of a new era, and to advance the claim that now the Prophet Muhammad was the last prophet for the previous era, and now here the new era now has come. The new era is beginning, so I'm bringing a new set of laws to bring us into this new to pave the way for the dawn of a whole new prophetic cycle, while emphasizing the appearance of the one whom God shall make manifest, and saying that the one whom God shall make manifest. This is the true meaning of the Day of Judgment, as mentioned in the Quran, and to cite his example as proof of this, he says that both the Quran and the Hadith speak of obeying God in everything until the coming of the Day of Judgment. And so he says, because the Day of Judgment is just a new cycle which God shall usher in, it means when this Day of Judgment happens, we're in this new cycle. It means the laws of Islam were the laws of Islam are going to be abrogated, and now you're obligated following this new prophet whom God shall bring to establish this new religion for this new prophetic period, which is going to be beginning. And furthermore, he draws on he makes the same argument in the Persian Bayan that the Quran uses to argue with its own critics. For the Quran is very clear and has challenged non-believers who disbelieve the message of the Quran, saying that, well, if you don't believe in the Quran, if you don't believe that this is really sent by God, well, then produce something like it. And which the challenge was, if you can produce Surah of the Quran analogous to, if you can write a Surah analogous to the you don't think the Quran's from God, then produce something of equal literary excellence. And of course, this was in the context of the position of the place the poetry had in pre-Islamic society. But then, so the Bab makes this same argument Persian Bayan, saying, "Hey, if you don't think I'm from God, I'm making the same challenge that Prophet Muhammad made to pagans and to Christians and Jews. Come produce something like that." And on that notion, in terms of his criticisms of contemporary Muslim society who don't believe in his message, he says, "Well, because I'm here as a new messenger sent by God for Muslims who don't believe in me, well, you basically entered into the same position that the Christians fell into with coming Prophet Muhammad, and you fell into the same position the Jews did when the Prophet Jesus came." Now, also his ideas evolved with regards to his own position to the Qajar monarch. Is that in his early attitudes towards kingship, he addresses the Qajar monarch as the Shah or the King of Kings, which was a title used by both the Safavid and Qajar monarchs, which was largely a holdover from Sassanid Iran. He never advocates he never directly advocates for the Qajar's abdication, and however later this of course ended up changing when he initiated a revolt against ruling Qajar authority, because also in addition to him challenging declaring himself to bring a new revelation and saying he's coming as a successor to the promised 12th Imam, coming and ushering his new Messianic age, he and his followers also looked and condemned the moral hypocrisy which they saw of contemporary Islamic Iranian society. Mainly he said that the practice of muta or temporary marriage, which was common in Iran, which has always been allowed Shiite Islam, is just a loophole for legalized prostitution. And he says that and there was Shiite Muslims who went to houses owned by Christians, went to alcohol shops owned by Christians and purchased alcohol from them, saying, "Well, it's okay because we can buy it from Christians." And he also had some different rules regarding purity. He changed laws regarding fasting. He changed things regarding various prayer, which all together denouncing many of the contemporary ulama, the marja of the society, for following more the letter, not the spirit of the laws. So both the Qajar monarchs and the ruling ulama of the time period unanimously saw Bab as a threat, and he attracted because of his rhetorical skills and because of his ability to captivate on a lot of frustrations that a lot of Iranian society had with the clergy and had with the Qajar monarchy. He was able to attract a significant following, and so he was actually seen as a threat to Iranian society. And so in 1846, after a period of after a period of capturing his followers, openly condemning the Qajar monarchy and the contemporary clergy, in 1846 or 1848, the Babis began the armed revolt against the Qajar state. And it's also interesting during this time period because even though he was still advocating, even though he had made these claims of saying, "I'm coming to break the cycle," the lines between Babi and Muslim were still a little ambiguous this time period, as families were often divided between two opposing factions. And John Walbridge, who wrote a very famous article about the Babi revolt, notes that despite the entirely new code of Babi law, which had been innovated by the Bab shortly beforehand, many Babis still practice Shiite law and theology. In the vast majority of the Bab's army, clearly didn't see themselves as following any new or distinct religion. Rather, they were taking part in the promised rising of the Mahdi, using black banners and clothes, which are described in Shia eschatology as rising above Imam. Eventually, the Babis negotiated a peace agreement with the ruling Qajar establishment, and they agreed to have something of a dhimmi status and put under a watchful eye of the Qajar establishment. And the truce lasted for a short while. However, it was only a matter of time before the peace agreement fell apart. And after a long period of bloody fighting between the Babis and the Qajar dynasty, the Babis eventually were crushed, and their movement was all but destroyed. And now, after the Bab's death, there was his movement. Well, after the Bab's death, his movement all but went away because in the aftermath, and this is something my colleague Stephen will be talking about or asked me a panel about a week, is that in the aftermath of the Bab's death, about 25 individuals made the claim to be the one whom God shall make manifest shall appear. And the most famous one was Baha'u'llah, who attracted the most following, and the vast majority of Babis ended up converting to the Baha'i faith and capitalizing on Bab's notion that, well, the coming of the Day of Judgment, Shiite law, Islamic law is null and void, and now you're obligated to follow this new messenger whom God has sent. Baha'u'llah did a complete break with Islam, and entirely, and his followers make no pretext to practicing as Muslims. Now, the remnants of there was a small faction of Babis who disagreed with the Baha'u'llah, who had believed, based on their interpretations of the Bab's writing, that the entire world had to convert to Babism before the one he whom God shall make manifest shall appear. And there was a strong feud between the leader of the Babi community and Baha'u'llah. But after the death of Sabr Azal, the Bab successor of the Babi community entered into a period of stagnation, and there's probably only a few thousand of them left, running along family lines. Just tying this all back to looking at, and it's also worth noting, tying this back to saying how the Babi movement got their start with Shiism, is that even when the Bab made his claims and capitalized on shaky theological concepts to advance his claim, there were also still many prominent Sheikhs who rejected the Bab's claim to religious authority. In fact, there were some who went to the Qajar monarchy and presented detailed argument and refutations of the Bab's positions from a Sheikhi perspective. And went in kind of complete, and those Sheikhs, interestingly enough, went into something of a completely different direction, where they said that, well, no Islamic law should be practiced, period, until the coming of Imam, so we shouldn't even have punishments for adultery or theft or any other thing else which is prescribed in the Quran. But now, tying this back to the earlier question of the consolidations of power, is that looking at Bab and his claims of religious authority, it represents what can be described as his, I guess, very direct and very innovative approaches to solving the problem of how do you properly consolidate power, which has been debated within Shiism, in claiming the mantle directly of the Mahdi and claiming the direct blessing from God. He's able to circumvent the debates which have been raging in the Shiite world over how to properly administer Islamic law. And secondly, it looks at the Babi move. It looks at how the Babis were the natural outgrowth of debates which occurred previously in Shiism regarding the proper relationship between Shia Islam and statecraft. For the Babi was able to capitalize on these ideas which had been developed over in the preceding centuries, or really over the previous millennia. So it's interesting now, and of course, Bab was not, even though he was most direct in claiming the mantle of divine authority for himself, saying, I'm the 12th Imam, I'm here to usher in the abrogation of Islamic law. It's interesting to draw a parallel comparison with him and other figures in Shiite history who've also claimed this mantle of direct divine authority, even though most of them didn't go really as far as the Bab did. It's no secret that both founders of the two notable Islamic state, Shiite Islamic states, so Shah Ismail and Khomeini, both played with the 12 rank. And even though And Shah Ismail, a lot of his earlier poetry makes very similar claims to the Bab, proclaiming himself to be a reincarnation from many notable figures in Islamic history, and his main supporters, the Kizilbash, who indulged because of their obedience to Shah Ismail, whom they saw as something of a blessed or an embodiment of God, able to practice many things which aren't necessarily part of Islamic orthodoxy. But even though Shah Ismail later distanced himself from that methodology, but definitely that playing with that Machiist messianic movement was a very clear part of the Shah Ismail and his claim to religious authority. And it was and of course, Khomeini never proclaimed himself to be the 12th Imam. Khomeini never even said that he received a vision from the 12th Imam. However, Khomeini clearly in his writings emphasizes that the importance of having one single leader who has the authority to properly implement and administer Islamic law. And similarly, how the Bab grew out of this mystical shaky notion, which emphasized this intimate relationship between God and creation. Khomeini himself also, very much came out of a mystical tradition and was heavily inspired by a different form of Sufism than the Bab was, but Khomeini himself heavily capitalized on Sufi theories, on mystical theories to bolster his claim. Now, on that note, I think I've gone on for about half an hour, so I will say thank you all very much for attending, and I guess I'll open this up for questions in about the 25 minutes we have remaining.
Thank you, Alex. You start, Hera.
Thank you, Alex. This is a newest topic. Forgive my ignorance about such like the theory of them of you explain about the historical analogy of this ism from the Ahmadi into the current Babism. So you emphasize the last one about the Mahdism, which is also my concern because you mentioned about how the Ahmadi in first place very much influenced by Mullah Sadr and Ibn because I know that Ibn Arabi and Mullah Sadr also have their different way of seeing and interpreting about walaya, right? Which is today they interpret it as wilaya instead of walaya. So how do you see this? Like you mentioned also about the Seiki mystical theory of Babi, right? Mm-hmm. So my question is like, how he come into conclusion about this kind of like a new religion instead of like instead of like using it like okay, like I have the similar kind of like revelation that what I inspired from the critical theology in general theology we can see it, which is believed to be the existence of the Mahdi, no matter what, who's the figure of the Mahdi. Right?
Thank you for that question. No, yeah, I mean, absolutely right. And that's, of course, very hot. That's, of course, a very extensive issue, the notion of the walaya, the forms of walaya, Shiism, and Sufism, and how, like people, like, of course, Ibn Arabi, and that's a major, that's how Ibn Arabi and Sunni Sufis in general kind of blur that difference. And because of course Imam Ali factors into the silsila of most Sunni Sufis, they all like the kind of gnosis that Imam Ali has is different than it's the same as like the gnosis that like the other later sheikhs in their lineage have. But in Shia Islam, the imams is a much higher position. Now, Sheikh al-Asai, I mean, he of course emphasizes this difference and says that he knows the feet of the Imam. Now, the Bab himself, I'm not sure if Bab, at least for the writings I've read from him, if he kind of goes on the difference between walaya, but he does say, I mean, he does use that term though in his commentary in both the Persian Bayan and his commentary on the Surah Yusuf. When he's talking about he says he's inherited the walaya, the viceroy of the succession of the prophets. So he definitely does capitalize on that in his writings to advance his religious claims.
So how did he translate the Quranic verses about the saint, the wali?
I actually don't know. That's a good question. I'll have to look into that and get back to you.
So I'm trying to figure out exactly what he's claiming. So I've heard a couple different things. So on the one hand, if he's the Bab, then what he is the conduit to the Mahdi. If he is the vice regent, that's something different entirely. That's like a somebody who's ruling in place of, right? And then toward the end, I thought you said that he actually claimed to be the Mahdi. So, and maybe his ideas evolved over time.
Yeah.
But what was his claim
Well, his initial
vis-a-vis
claim-
the Mahdi?
His initial claim is the Bab,
Right.
paving the way for becoming Prophet Muhammad, but later his ideas seem to have evolved and say, no, he is a Prophet Muhammad, bringing this previous cycle to a close.
I see.
And this prophetic cycle is shaped by the Prophet Muhammad to a close.
I see.
And then but at the same time saying he's a ring on the finger of the one. He's that phrase, the ring on the finger of the one whom God shall make manifest. He's saying it's Prophet Muhammad who's bringing this cycle to a close, and this one who's going to come later and usher in the next Yom al-Qiyamah, this one who's going to come and usher in this new era, is going to be, he's greater than the Prophet Muhammad.
He'll be a prophet.
He's a whole new prophet,
right,
who's coming to initiate this whole new set of laws,
right,
for a whole new humanity. And a verse which I'm not sure if Bob makes this argument in any of his writings, but I heard from a Baha'i friend of mine that a verse which Baha'is use in the Quran to justify this is a verse of the Quran. It says an angel will blow will blow the horn, destroy the universe, will blow another horn and recreate it. They say the first horn blowing of destroying the universe, that's the Bab. The second horn blowing, that's Baha'u'llah. That's their interpretation. I'm not sure if Bob specifically makes an argument if that was their Baha'i theology.
So what's the?
I believe you're correct that the Pope appeared to make different claims and that over time it evolved. Of course, his main claim was not that he's the 12th Imam. His main claim, which became very explicit in all his writings during the last 3.5 years of his life, was that he's a new prophet of God, that he's the return of Prophet Muhammad, he's the return of Jesus, he's the return of Moses, and so on. He called himself Man Zahar, indeed he who has been manifested, as opposed to next prophet that he called whom God shall make manifest man goes hard. So the idea that he claimed that he's a new prophet of God, that the age of Islam is over, the laws of Islam are completely abrogated, and that he is beginning a new religion and a new spiritual cycle. That is actually the essence of his claim. That element is absolutely explicit. With the first chapter of the Persian Dialogue, his claim is emphasized and emphasized and emphasized, and then subsequent statements that he makes. So he whom God shall make manifest is expression of his idea that religious truth is also relative, and human society is historical and dynamic, and so no religious law can be eternally valid, and that therefore he is not the last prophet of God. There will be one after him, but he says that after that, he whom God shall make manifest, there will be next he whom God shall make manifest after him, and says indefinitely eternity is will continue. But the point that I wanted to make is that although this became his essence, the essence of his claim, and so if he says that I am the 12th Imam, he is reinterpreting the concept of 12th Imam. 12th Imam is not the person who was born 260 years after the Hijrah of Muhammad, and he was a child and went into occultation and so on. For him, these are all metaphorical statements, not a historical event, and so he completely rejects the concept of 12 Imam as the Shiis in general understand. He believes that that's an illusion, no reality. But the spiritual meaning of the concept of Imam, he believes that he is that, but that is a new prophet of God. However, from the first day of his appearance, even in what we discussed, his first main book, commentary on the Surah of Joseph, although he calls himself the Bab, but the meaning of the Bab now is completely different from the way she is understood. He says that I am the Bab, and my proof is what you mentioned correctly in terms of Persian Bayan. He makes that in that book and all his books. He says that I bring divine revelation exactly as Muhammad brought the Quran, the word of God, and nobody can bring anything like that. So he calls himself the Bab, but this Bab is a person who received direct revelation from God, and nobody has authority to challenge him. And so, although it is the word Bab is used, and those who didn't understand really believe that his claim is that he is the gate to the 12 Imam. His claim from the very beginning was that he's not only the gate to the Imam, he's the 12 Imam, he's the prophet of God, and more important than all of this, in his terminology, is the point that has very symbolic meaning. So the Bab becomes B, A, and B. For him, B becomes the station of servitude. The other B becomes the station of divinity, and A becomes what unites them together. So he calls himself the Bab primarily in the sense that he's the reality. Through him, the world which are defined by servitude can connect to the divinity, although this divinity is present in everything. So everything is Bab, according to the Bab. But in him, that aspect of divinity becomes actualized. So whatever you discussed, I enjoyed that, and almost everything is correct in my judgment. But his claim was much more radical, much more break with Islam and Shiism from the very beginning. But that was not understood even by most of the Babis at the beginning. So John Baldrige is correct when he talks about the Babis at that time. But that is the reason for that is that the Babis, early Babis didn't know even really what the Bab is saying or his claim. So they interpreted a lot of these things in terms of Shi'i categories and understanding. But the meanings in the worldview of the Bab was much more radical. And he completely eliminated the idea of ulama. He said that everybody is equal, and he forbid the idea that anybody would mount on puppet. So Udebar Manbak, he prohibited it completely, and he believed that all human beings have this divine light within themselves, and therefore, in terms of authority, also his theology leans towards a democratic conception rather than a theocratic conception.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And that clarifies something for me too, because going to Carl's, question is that reading, because reading the Persian Bayan and reading the Sir Joseph, reading the articles about the Bab, it's at least the impression that I got, the impression that other scholars have, is his claim went from being the Bab to being the Imam, but you're saying that makes more sense, is that these are both different. This was never an evolution of his claims. He's always claiming to be a new prophet using the term Bab and Imam. A different sense. Okay, that's interesting. I'll have to keep that in mind and then go back and maybe read the Persian, read the text in more detail. Thank you very much.
What is the interpretation of heaven and hell? Because they don't have the judgment days have different meaning. So what is the meaning of heaven and hell?
Well, I'm actually not sure. I didn't come across much discussion of that in Bob's writings when I was doing it. I'm not sure. Only time I've heard from Baha'is is that they, at least, is that they believe in a afterlife, but they don't really talk about it. I guess you can find out better than I do.
Actually, that is one of the most interesting and creative aspects of the writings of the Bab. He discusses that in his earlier works, including what is called Sahife Adliye, which is in Persia, the Book of Justice, something like that. But the more extensive discussion of this topic begins with Persian Bayan. So it is in the last 3.5 years of his life, when he's a prisoner in Azerbaijan, in Baku, Chehri, that he writes very explicitly about his idea that previously he would talk with wisdom in a way that people would not be completely frightened. But after that, it is very clear. He says that in terms of the concept of heaven and hell and concept of resurrection become completely linked to in his writings. And he says the first item of his belief is that heaven and hell is not just for human beings. So the typical understanding in Shia Islam and even Sunni Islam is that heaven and hell belongs to humans. At the end of the world, people are resurrected, gathered before God, and God makes judgment. They go to heaven or hell on the basis of what they have done. But the Bab argued that everything has a heaven and hell. And he defined the heaven of everything, including human beings, attainment of its potentialities, or attaining its perfection. And he defined hell for everything as deprivation of realizing its potentiality. And for that reason, for him, everything has a moral right. So nature also has moral right. It's not just humans, like Kantian theory that only humans have moral rights and nature has no moral right. For him, everything is a reflection of God. Everything, as I mentioned before, has servitude and divinity, ubudiyat and uluhiyat. Then everything is the mirror of God, an image of God is reflected, that is their divinity. But at the same time, they are a specific class, different from other classes, which makes their servitude. So everything has servitude and divinity. And for the Bab, therefore, everything has this moral right to achieve its heaven. And he writes in Persian Bayan frequently that humans have this moral responsibility that to the extent of their power, try to make everything reach their heaven. And he said that if human beings have power to do that and not to do that, they would be accountable to God. So you can see elements of protection of nature, preservation of environment, and everything has rights and so on, as a significant element of society. Then comes with human beings. So for human beings, attainment of heaven becomes again actualization of their potentialities. But because our truth is this spiritual reflection of God, that means that attainment of heaven means understanding divine and spiritual truth. But for him, humans are dynamic. And so heaven at one stage becomes the hell of the next stage. So in Persian Bayan, he has a statement, it's one of my favorite statements. He says, Jannat dar har zaman kamal an zaman ist. Heaven, in any age, heaven of that age is the perfection of that age. And so for him, at each specific historical stage of development of humanity, realization of concrete spiritual potentialities at that time becomes heaven. Once humanity has achieved that, in the next stage, if it becomes stagnant in that stage, it remains in hell. Hell becomes deprivation. So it has to go and attain new potentiality. And this became for him the theory of progressive revelation. Namely, God would send new messages, new ideas, which correspond to the new spiritual potentiality of humanity as a historical dynamic being. And that's why he believes that there is no last prophet of God, that it continues at each time it changes, but they are all one and the same. You mentioned correctly that he interpreted in his book that Joseph becomes Imam Hussein. But in that same book, Imam Hussein becomes the Bab himself. And that is a very important expression of his basic idea that the truth of all prophets is one and the same. And that one divine truth manifests itself in history in different times in accordance with the requirements of the time. And so it becomes a historical. So heaven and hell becomes also historical.
Thank you for that, like the explanation.
Yeah, like for me, the interesting point is like he accepts the other prophets before him, right?
Yes.
So like I can understand like the need of change according to time, according to place in the Islamic law, because it's like verb, but like kind of difficult for me to understand why he changed the eschatology like after life, because it's kind of like eternal and not like worldly thing. Like Islamic law needing to change according to time, according to place.
Yes.
I understand that part, but if he believes the other prophets were like true, they brought the truth. So how, like why they wanted to change the eschatology? Like,
I'm so sorry that I have talked so much.
Oh, no, sorry, we're gonna, please,
For the Bab, he believes that statements in the scriptures of the past, including the Quran, particularly when they are talking about the beginning of the world and the end of the world, he believes that they are metaphorical. They are not literal statements. And so he believes that not only the story of Adam and Eve and things like that are not actual historical events, but they are metaphorical spiritual meanings. Also a statement about the day of resurrection in the Quran, they are all spiritual metaphors and they are not literal. So he defines them really as the expressions of the historical development of humanity. So it becomes very this worldly in a sense. However, because he believes that the entire world is a reflection of God, in a sense, he becomes at the same time totally worldly and at the same time becomes completely spiritualistic. So for him, our soul, because it is a spiritual that does not die with the death of the body. But for him, the soul, not our body would not be resurrected. It's even Sheikh Ahmad had said that was his most important statement about the day of resurrection. Sheikh Ahmad distinguished between two bodies. Sheikh Ahmad Ahsan. And so he said that the material body that would die and would not be resurrected. But he talked about another body, a body which is archetypal body, Jasad Mesali, which goes back to Mullah Sadra to a large extent this concept. And he believed that this is sort of a spiritual body. This is the one which would be resurrected and would go to heaven or hell and so on. The Bab went beyond all these things and said that no, body goes away and it is only human soul, human spirit, which goes to next stage. But that stage is not a material state, it's not in a space. And so for him, punishment and reward would continue, but there are infinite worlds after this material world, not just one world eternally. So for him, even punishment and reward become a matter of justice, giving second chances and third chances, because in the literal interpretation of Islam and Quran, if you have done something bad in this world, you are going to be eternally tortured. And this is not in accordance with the concept of divine justice. So for the Bab, we don't have next world, but next worlds, and they are spiritual. But he says that we cannot know. Humanity in this world cannot know, cannot conceptualize, cannot imagine the reality of the next world. And therefore he says that instead of speculation about that, concentrate your minds about this world and spiritual perfection in this.
So Alex, what about Khomeini? Since he doesn't have the trappings of claiming to be the Bab or the Mahdi or whatever, what is the analogy then from the 19th century figures that you're talking about and the 1970s figures? That seems like a significant difference. So how does, obviously Khomeini believes in the concentration of power. Mm-hmm. So is it just that? Is it, or is there more to the analogy than that?
Well, that's I know that's the gist of it, but a more consolidation of power is that Khomeini's claim to authority is also specifically a mystical and religious one. Now, and in the sense that, of course, and it all is at a Shiite standpoint, but even is more. I mean, I present about this. I have a chapter on this in my dissertation too, and I present about this. It asked me 2 years ago. I heard here 2 years ago. Here through through Sesame that about the Sufism of Khomeini, how his guardianship of the jurists, it wasn't just the guardianship of the legal jurists. It's more to say the guardianship of the Ada, or the guardianship of the Gnostic who's attained the state of mystical purity. And even though, of course, many differences, Bob is saying, well, he's chosen for this purpose by God. And Khomeini, it's more like the Gnostic is the one who has attained the state of spiritualization through the state of spiritual ascension. That's the similarity there, because Khomeini in his writings makes it numerous. I mean, Khomeini rages against contemporary clergy, contemporary jurists all the time in his writings, but he never condemns the Arifs, the knowers of God. He never condemns Sufis, and he makes it clear that they're the most pure form, of knowledge. And also, there's some. I don't dispute this way. Some people, what's his name? Sadamir, not Sadamir, Said Hussein Nasr's son, who wrote a book called Valley Nasr. That's what I'm thinking of. Valley Nasr. They save me for a second. Valley Nasr, in his book Shared Revival, his writings on Khomeini, talk about Khomeini's behavior during the Iran-Iraq War, says that Khomeini definitely played with kind of the notion that he might have been 12th Imam. And there's stories attributed. I mean, I'm not sure if these are true, where someone asks about the carnage caused by the Iran-Iraq War, kind of Iraq. He says, well, you don't blame God for causing an earthquake. Don't blame me for doing this. And so at least, and other people dispute that interpretation of Khomeini, at least Khomeini Valley Nasr. Khomeini definitely did play with 12th Imam.
What's the chain of transmission for that story?
Well, the translation, I'm not really sure. I read it in Valley Nasr's book, but I'm not sure that he gets his citation from. It's not, but at least according to him, the color people Khomeini definitely played with that messianic, notion as well.
Right. Okay. Are there any others?
We're out of time, aren't we?
Yes. Thank you very much, Alex.
Thank you very much.